Coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about the state of the art in blockchain and cryptocurrency technology. Reimagine 2020.
Hello, everyone. We're back with another university segment of the Reimagine 2020 Virtual Blockchain Conference. My name is Ashlie Meredith, and I'm head of education over at MouseBelt Blockchain Accelerator. And I'm here with a really awesome panel, a topic that's really close to my heart, as this has been my career up until I came into blockchain, but even now, which is the future of education, ed tech, making education better for students, making education better for teachers. I have taught and tutored at the university level for over 12 years now, and now build educational programming for entrepreneurs and developers in blockchain through our accelerator. We have one of our MouseBelt University students here, Lucas. Lucas can go ahead and introduce himself.
Hi, Ashley. I'm very happy to be at the panel here today. So my name is Lucas Gil. I am from Barcelona, Spain. And as Ashley said, I was recently in university until recently. Right now, I am the CEO and co-founder of a startup called EagleCheck, which uses blockchain to try and make education and employment credentials verifiable, digital, and student or user owned. So we've been working with universities, we've been working with background screening companies, and I'm really excited to be part of the panel and to be able to share some experiences and some thoughts. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this panel because I think all of you have such diverse backgrounds and come to the education space from a lot of different angles. So Lucas was a student who, got some entrepreneurial and blockchain education from MouseBelt, but also was at a business school and ended up launching his own ed tech product, which we have now invested in. And then we also have some educators on the panel as well, people who have instructed at the university level and are working on their own ed tech projects, one of whom is also a philosopher like myself. So I was instructing in philosophy for the last few years before going into blockchain, most recently at Portland State University, and through looking for other people interested in these deeper questions or the underpinnings of this technology and what it could do for humanity, started to run into people like Sherry Jones. So Sherry, why don't you introduce yourself to our viewers?
Thanks, Ashley. So my name is Sherry Jones, and I am a philosophy and game studies instructor and subject matter expert at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. My interest in blockchain actually started several years ago. When I heard of this technology, I was very curious about it. So I did a lecture series after much investigation of what it can do regarding how blockchain can be used in the game space. And what's exciting for the game space is how it can save assets, turn assets into token perhaps, and trade. So we can trade outside of a game, not just within the game gaming system, okay, economy system. But also I started to think about, with this technology, what else can we do for the humanities? What else can we do for academia? So I started to see an intersection because of the ability that blockchain can save and secure information. I thought about open educational resources being saved on blockchain and what that can do for teachers, what that can do for students. Oftentimes in the conversation regarding OER is primarily focused on students, which is very important. But teachers get left out of the conversation, and teachers are the one who are primarily creating OERs. So I would like to contribute to that conversation today.
Oh, definitely. And that's one of the most exciting things about blockchain for me is this ability to really give credit or give compensation to content creators. And gosh, if teachers aren't like some of the #1 content creators in our society. So Sherry actually happens to live in the Denver area where I just moved in December. And through going to some blockchain meetups here, I got to meet Taylor, who is working on learning economy. So Taylor, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, Taylor Kendal. I am the Chief Program Officer at Learning Economy Foundation. We sort of have a blue sky vision of education where skills and knowledge are actually treated like assets and have sort of a currency behind them, the way we currently trade and utilize fiat currency to make purchases. So we really want to invert the model. As debt is a serious problem right now across the board in education. So we're working in a number of different areas to re-envision education where we actually earn to learn, as opposed to paying astronomical costs to get an education. We think there's a future where knowledge are treated like assets, and we can actually create market economies on top of it. So that's the big picture vision.
So you're saying that people would earn while they're learning?
Yeah. Yep. Earn. Yeah. The act of learning itself and acquiring knowledge and skills, becomes a currency. And again, blockchain, crypto, the whole Web3 world is deeply tied into making that possible. So.
Yeah, the capacity to like tokenize a lot of real world interactions or transactions and put them on a blockchain and have micropayments and things like that really opens up the possibilities. Thanks, Taylor. One more university instructor, education folk, Ed Gonsalves. He's also in Barcelona, like Lucas.
Hi, Ashley. Thanks so much for having me along in at the last minute as well. I am actually in London, the UK. Interestingly enough, I split my time between, I live in Barcelona, but unfortunately, 2 days before my last flight, London locked down. And I've been here ever since. Yeah, I don't know. I am super excited already. I had no idea really what I was getting into when Lucas said, I really think you should attend this. We've got some exciting people, and almost to a T, I think all of you, I can make some connection with you. You've kind of lit my mind up. A little bit of background in the education, and then, well, maybe blockchain first. I'm probably different to most of you. My background in blockchain has really been as a business professor consultant with clients, and the most recent one is, if I can metaphor it, it's in this space of supply chain management and tracing. And typically, you've all seen the movie Blood Diamond, and it is how do we make sure that we are ethically supplying to automotive battery component manufacturers. So there's been that space, maybe medium recently, the last 2 years, with the health system provider over here in the UK, how they're using blockchain to sort of empower patients. And there's a whole issue around that. And to be quite honest, it stuns me that it was only in the last year, and thanks to Lucas, that I started asking myself the question, and I have other people like you guys asking the question, what the hell are you doing with blockchain in education? Which is weird, because my educational training is based at the Open University in the UK. And if you know that, it is one of the original MOOC, if you want to paraphrase it, generators, providers, producers set up in the 1960s to reach out to those on the edge of society. And so now I get a lot of guidance from a team over there who are working, they have 173,000 students, none of them on campus. So this current crisis doesn't beg the same questions of the Open University as it does the rest of us. And they're working with blockchain and to look at many of the questions and many of the spheres that have been raised already. So how do you achieve transferability? How do you create an asset from the learning you go through, and not merely the learning as assessment? Taylor would probably relate to this, but the experiences we go through and how you capturing that. It appears that a blockchain, in allowing the learner ownership, and partly that's driven by compliance as well now, affords that. So I'm super excited for this conversation. And I have to be honest, I'm probably newer than most to the blockchain world. I only really started engaging in it about 18 months ago. Thanks.
Well, that's great. Maybe you can ask some of the questions to our more experienced panelists that some of our viewers might have anyway.
Right.
So yeah, excited about the very diverse backgrounds of people we have here, students, instructors, and then also Joel, who's coming from the VC world. Really excited to hear. I mean, you don't need to convince any of us that investing in education is a good move, but maybe people in the blockchain world or other VCs in the blockchain space, maybe they should be looking at some of these things more too. So yeah, please introduce yourself. Tell us what you're working on.
Great, thanks, Ashlie. So I'm Joel Camacho. I'm a VP at NEWU Venture Partners, which is a VC anchored by Western Governors University. And Western Governors University, WGU, is the largest online competency-based university in the US. So a lot of the things that we focus on are on the digital learning side and the future of work, but even more specifically for this panel is how is blockchain technology breaking down barriers, i.e. making things more accessible and affordable? How is it enabling better data tracking in order to service students better?
Awesome. So I think for all of the students who are watching this at home, you know, we kind of whipped up this virtual blockchain conference in response to all of the shelter-in-place orders. Our students' events were being canceled, and we really wanted to provide them with some good content, especially guidance in this time where a lot of students that I hear from are just looking for someone to make blockchain tangible to them, to tell them, you know, what are you doing in the space? How can I get there? So I think it's been really valuable to kind of ask people, how did you get into blockchain? What were the steps that really make it make sense for you? And I think from at least the instructors on the call, I definitely want to hear about your experiences as an instructor and why you think that blockchain or other emerging technologies can make instructors' lives easier, better, enhance student outcomes, all those things that we like. So anyone want to, maybe Sherry can go first.
Okay, so let me start by discussing a little bit on some of the strength and weaknesses of OER, so open educational resources. So open educational resources is when, you know, professors publish textbooks, you know, learning materials online and share with folks without cost, right? Because that's really a good way to reduce costs for students, because we're all concerned about how much higher education costs now, especially with textbook costing, you know, $300-400 or $500 per class. So that is the strength of OERs. But the problem with OERs is that copyright, many OER materials are copyrighted with Creative Commons license, but Creative Commons license are not trackable. If you folks go onto Creative Commons, the site itself says that they're not responsible for tracking, nor do they have the technology to do so. They can't track if something is labeled as CC and someone steals from that content. They can't track it. And it's not their fault, because how can you track when the internet is the way that it is? It's very hard to find anything. Everything is based on the Google search engine, which is great, but it's not enough to track the authority of items. So when I got into the blockchain space and I started to see the possibility of what blockchain can do, particularly for OERs, that means we can actually track the origin, who was the original author of an OER. But let's say if I publish an OER material to allow someone to remix it, I want blockchain to be able to also document not only myself as the original author, but someone who remixed it as well. So someone can always trace down the rabbit hole of who created that thing. Now, what does that mean for teachers? You know, teachers like myself, I don't mind creating materials that are free for students because I care about my students, but I at least want to be acknowledged that I did this work because I think that will be part of my, you know, as I build my ethos, my credibility as an instructor, that I'm publishing all this material, and if someone takes it and spin it and so forth, I want people to be able to trace it back to myself. Also, I think it's wonderful that blockchain would be able to document the educational influence that I had. So I'll explain to you from a humanities perspective, okay? I'm gonna use the English discipline for just a second. When someone gets a PhD in English, it depends on what their emphasis, what their specialty is. So for example, someone might be trained in rhetoric, which is study of argumentation. Someone might be trained in creative writing. Other people might be trained in composition. So professors actually have all different specialties, right, in the English discipline. So when they write a textbook and I see that the book is about rhetoric, but it's written by perhaps a creative writing instructor, that should be actually documented on that blockchain. So people know the quality of that material. So it's not good enough to just document and say a book is an asset, but I also wanted to be able to trace the educational influences that went into creating that book. The person who created that book also adds to the ethos, right? The credibility of the material. So essentially, my thinking is that the creator of the material should be acknowledged, okay? And also every single thing that's been remixed should be acknowledged. So the process in which something is created should be all acknowledged on a blockchain. It also solves a big problem with us with plagiarism because if everything is documented, we always know from the metadata who was the original author of that material. So everything will be created, everything will be trackable. So for me, from that perspective, that's what I'm very interested in. In terms of my side project, which I didn't quite mention earlier, is that I do have a little game company where we're making learning games. Particularly, I am thinking about this idea of an idea economy, which it was great talking to Taylor because Taylor is the director of learning economy, but we were playing with this idea for a long time, which is that how about if we can actually trade our ideas, but get acknowledged for being the author of that idea? So an idea, you know, in philosophy, when we talk about an argument, right? An argument has a claim and a reason. So here's why I believe something to be true and my reason for believing it. Someone has to author that. And also with an argument, you have to support it with evidence. So where did I get my ideas and what evidence did I use to support my idea? So with our little learning game, which is a MMO, massively multiplayer online game, we want people to be able to document, create blocks of idea, and later they can actually sell those blocks, which is trade as tokens with other people who want to follow that idea because the idea have high credibility. It's acknowledged in the field as having high credibility, well documented with evidence, and they can trade in this idea economy. So I'm thinking farther than just little game assets, but ideas as assets. So even down to the granular level, where education can go much further than how we understand it now. And I want to pass the baton.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Sherry. Yeah, I do want to go back a little bit because we are going to talk about different ways that blockchain touches the education space, but I think you brought up something kind of unique that the other people on this panel might not talk about because their focus may be more on credentialing or finding ways to pay earners and to pay learners. But this idea of progeny and ownership and even over and above financial incentive, maybe people who are listening in who aren't in academia or who aren't content creators might not understand why it's so important to be able to trace the ownership or the birth of an idea, because you're talking about like open educational resources. You're not going to see any money from that, but there's still something important about putting your name on it. And I understand as a researcher who, you know, did a master's thesis, and you can track influence of people in your field by how many citations they have. Maybe you can say a little bit more, because I think that'll be a good point about blockchain in general, because there are a lot of people working on solutions for copyright, music, art, all these different things. Like, why is it so important, regardless of whether it's about making sure people are compensated for their work, that they just get acknowledged for their work.
Okay. So when we contribute our ideas, it's also a demonstration. I'll go back to the word ethos, credibility. How do we build credibility? It's based on what we produce out there. So even if we're not the primary driver of a project, when we contribute idea to a project, we are a contributor. And how does that have to do with, for example, when a student is about to go seek a job, and let's say an employer say, we want you to demonstrate critical thinking skills, creativity, right? Now, a university or an educational institute can say, you know, this person has creative thinking skills, or this person has critical thinking skills. But those are, again, and I don't want to be rude, but those are generalities, which is what exactly specifically are you creative in? How do we document that? What did you actually contribute? Were you a team player? Did you actually collaborate with someone? That's why those single, very specific granular information, if we can do it, will be very awesome for both teachers and students, because I can build my reputation as an instructor. You as a student can also build your reputation, because I don't believe in student creating things just for the teacher. They are also building their own reputation as they create educational assets, which is papers, physical projects, you know, like for example, chemistry experiments, so forth. They are all building their ethos as they go. So I think that if we can trace the origin of who did what, that actually help you build your reputation. So I keep going back to the word reputation. And
No, I love that. That's exactly, yeah, reputation, credibility. We're talking about how to prove you are who you say you are, and you've done what you say you did. And we'll move on to like credentialing and background checks with like EagleCheck and how that kind of ed tech can help learners prove what they've learned, or people prove that they have certain job experience. But it just kind of made it click for me just now with you talking about that, and hopefully our viewers can see that too, that these kind of solutions for ed tech are exactly what blockchain was made for. We're talking about trust, we're talking about reputation, we're talking about credibility. How do I know that the person that I hired has the skills they said they did? So perfect use case for blockchain, I think. Everything you're saying about open educational resources and copyright and all of that. So I hope everyone listening can really see all of the potential there for using blockchain and these technologies. Maybe it's a good transition to talk more about credentialing and like we said, reputation, proving you are who you said you are. I think of all of these things in blockchain as really an identity solution. It's finding a way to own some kind of private key, right, that only I have access to, or I can grant permissions to show people this truth statement about me. Like, I am this person, I have this credential. Yeah, maybe Lucas, I kind of saw your team come from the beginning of this, which it was just an idea of putting diplomas on the blockchain. And it was a really early stage idea. And we actually sat down with your team and we're like, what do you really want to work on? And have you done the research? And so you guys had to dive in, and really you found that the real problem was that it's largely time inefficient, cost inefficient, all of the background checking that goes into job searches and all of that. But tell us a little more about your journey and why you think blockchain can really help learners and job seekers and employers and educators.
Sure. Yeah, so as Ashlie was mentioning, we at EduNow started because we were all at university back then, and we started talking with our professors and the staff of the university about the problems they had, to try to see whether there was a blockchain solution or not, because we weren't big proponents of just throwing blockchain at the table and throwing blockchain at everything, right? Then we found the use case of the diplomas, which we believe still is quite interesting, the whole digital credential space, because as you guys were speaking about, well, we're moving towards a digital economy, obviously, and as Ashlie was mentioning, we found out after doing a lot of research that the processes are very inefficient, right? It doesn't make sense that nowadays when you apply for a position at Google, for example, someone has to call your university and your past employer to ask for your experience and about your diplomas. So we believe that blockchain is a wonderful solution and a very straightforward solution in that use case, because it allows people to have control of their data, which we believe is quite important. And then it allows them to, in an instant, be able to share that information with someone else, while ensuring trust, right? You were talking about trust before as well, and I believe at the end blockchain is about trust. So what we're doing right now is we're helping these background screening companies, which is a very big market in the States, for example. It's 3.2 billion only there. Improve their processes.
Sorry, so you're working on like a business to business solution. You're working with the actual background check companies.
Right, yeah.
And you're saying it's a $3.2 billion industry just in the US?
Yeah, that's correct.
Wow.
And so for us at the end, the question becomes, and I'm sure all of you guys have really interesting points of view about this, how do we get the ball rolling, right? How do we start creating digital credentials that are actually on the blockchain, and how can we start having people use those credentials, for example? So again, we started with universities, then we realized universities were quite slow in adopting new technology. And here in Europe, there were a lot of legislative, I would say, barriers for scaling. So then we realized there was an opportunity in the background screening industry to help them in a very easy way by improving their processes and by allowing them to verify people way easier. And by doing that, we're also contributing to this database at the end of the day, where people are going to start having their own digital credentials, and hopefully in a few years everyone will be able to have their own credentials in their mobile phone and be able to showcase them anywhere in the world and in a matter of seconds, which is what we're aiming for.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions you wanted to address for this panel that you sent me before was, how do we get people to start using digital credentials, and how do we drive adoption? How do we convince regulators and universities and legislators? So I think it's a good question for Taylor, because with the learning economy, you have that great graphic. I've shown it to so many people on my team on the learningeconomy.io of this kind of ecosystem that the learning economy would be based on. And it involves governments, it involves universities, it involves employers. So maybe you can talk about some of your experiences trying to talk to all of these different groups, and maybe you have some ideas about how we can drive adoption of blockchain in the ed tech space. Sure,
yeah. It is paramount. It's like top of mind, and certainly right now with the pandemic, I think, yeah, we're trying to be patient, knowing that we're still early on in the days of how this technology is going to evolve. But I think we're also at an interesting pivot point where those that potentially thought maybe wait a couple years are now like, okay, the world's changing under our feet. Maybe now is the time to really be courageous and bold about trying some of this out. So yeah, learning economy, we are sort of a steward of the open internet of education. That we see ourselves as sort of this neutral convener. So because of that, yeah, we're working across a number of stakeholder groups, public, private, government. We ourselves are a nonprofit. So yeah, part of this work right now, I think, is a lot of bridge building and realizing that there's no sort of, I don't think the sort of killer app is going to come about anytime in the near future. So in the meantime, as we're sort of learning and evolving this technology, I think it's really important to respect existing infrastructure, respect sort of legacy institutions, of which education is certainly one, and find ways to integrate in a sort of responsible and respectful way. And we've certainly made some ground by doing that. There's a lot of interesting credentialing pilots happening. I think 2020 2021 is going to be an interesting couple of years where we really start to prove out some of these models. And one thing I should definitely mention is this Trust over IP Foundation, which was recently launched as a Linux Foundation project that I think is really a foundational new movement and sort of community that is going to help accelerate a lot of this work. Definitely worth peeking at. I think it gives a lot of credibility to where this ecosystem might be heading, and has a lot of, I mean, we're talking MasterCard, IBM, Accenture, you know, SICK, but a lot of these big organizations that are really interested in sort of trust and digital identity are behind it. So yeah, I mean, happy to go into details on sort of the practical pieces of some of what we're working towards. But without a question, right now is a time to not sort of look down upon the legacy institutions that have got us to this point, but to build the right bridges. And Sherry knows, you know, ETH Denver was this really interesting moment where we had, you know, state governors coming to a blockchain event and sitting up on stage with a Buffacorn and Vitalik Buterin of Ethereum. So we're starting to see indications that, like, you know, the sort of legacy and the future worlds are willing to come together and try to build something pretty interesting. So
I want to push you on that, or just talk a little bit more about that, because as soon as you said, like, we need to respect the legacy institutions, I'm a university professor. I have multiple degrees. I've worked in the administrative side of universities, in alumni offices, wellness centers, student services. I'm so entrenched in the university world, but I also have experienced some of the, like, I'm a first generation college student. I'm a woman in a male dominated field. As Sherry totally understands, philosophy is the most disparate humanities major. I, you know, have a lot of friends, you know, the legacy institutions have failed me and so many others, or made it just so difficult. And working in blockchain education and trying to forge partnerships, I'm sure you've experienced as well, with universities, as Lucas said, are slow to adopt new technologies, and it can just get so frustrating. And I sometimes get in this space of, like, I have to temper any excitement with the gravity of the situation, of course, but, like, I'm kind of happy that people are kind of being forced to try more virtual stuff with education, that we're gonna have more access and more opportunity for people who are disabled, who can't afford to travel, all these different things. Why I'm so excited to do this conference is because I can bring this content to all of my students who have been, you know, putting in funding requests or asking for help to throw their own conferences or to travel. So I'm kind of stuck in between this, like, I'm from the academy and I've lived in the ivory tower, to, like, I want to tear that tower down. So
and I think, yeah, I think, you know, we share that. And I mean, in all transparency, I mean, I was, you know, on this sort of traditional academic path, and, you know, was working within an institution, and I've definitely stepped outside of that because I hit certain barriers that felt like they were, you know, both challenges for me personally, but also I felt like I could just make a bigger impact by not being sort of in the minutia and being mired in all that is legacy institution, whether that's, again, education's the focus here, but there's other institutions that have that problem. And when I say respect the institution, I think it's not about sort of laying down to the things that we see as being problems. It's both being courageous and bold, and really finding folks that are willing to identify the cracks and start to pry away at the, as you say, the ivory tower that has it, that I think, you know, we need more open honesty about where those cracks exist and why there are problems. But to get there, I don't think you know, we can't throw stones, I guess, you know, creating friction between the two worlds is not going to get us there. So it's how to do it in a way that's also respecting folks that have put a ton of time, you know, lifetimes into that sort of institution, the power system, all the things that come and cause problems. It's a really delicate balance, and I'll be open. I mean, I am in the middle of trying to figure it out and balance it. But I do think I lean on this idea of infrastructure inversion, which I think probably Andreas Antonopoulos is one that I heard it from first. But any infrastructure historically, if you look at sort of horse to automobile, early electrification, there's always this process of new infrastructure sort of existing and riding upon the infrastructure of old. So in this case, think new cars driving on paths that were, meant for horses. That's sort of an existing infrastructure. I think, we're at this point where right now we're trying to envision new infrastructure, whether that's identity, credentialing, all the things that come with what blockchain and Web3 enables. And we're sort of finding out how can we allow it to ride on this legacy, this sort of incumbent infrastructure for the right length of time to have it be accepted, to have policy come about at a governmental level, to have state leaders, respect and understand what the potential is. And then hopefully, and I think at some point we'll see a shift. I know all of us are sort of in the camp of like, let's see this shift happen right now. But I think that shift will actually come at some point, but it's only going to come with sort of integrating with the existing legacy infrastructure, for some period of time. So but I'm with you, Ashlie. Like, I have no problem at this point in my life. I've been a part of the institution long enough, and I'm perfectly willing to stand up when folks aren't willing to be bold and courageous and say times are changing. There's also just an inevitability of like technology shifting. Like I'm past pandering to those that like, don't see that things will change and are changing, and I'd rather be a part of the process of shaping it in a way that's going to be, beneficial to that's why I love Sherry's view, which is like, let's make sure educators, and students both are feeling valued in what we're creating. So, yeah, but I'm with you. Like, let's overthrow.
Tear down
I'm
the
ready
tower. Well, maybe Joel has a unique insight here as working with a university that is primarily or only online. So as we talk about, universities being slow to adopt technological developments, all these different things, he's working with an investment fund that is an online school, and they're obviously focusing on products that help student outcomes. So I think maybe they're a little bit ahead of the game. So any insight from that side of things, Joel?
I would say that we're definitely ahead of the game, right? WGU was founded in the late 1990s with this mission. So delivering education through the internet was definitely a novel idea back then, and they persisted over the decades. And now we have this model that is able to service students from a wide variety of diverse backgrounds. And if we think about the demo of the student population, 70% of the students that are enrolled at WGU, which by the way, it's currently over 120,000 students currently enrolled at WGU.
Wow.
And that kind of gives you a sense of the breadth of scale and how many people you can reach with an online model versus, say, the traditional gatekeepers of higher ed, who, your Harvards of the world, even your large state schools, they all are limited by the number of physical space they have on their campuses. And to increase that physical space, it's really expensive. So a lot of them just don't do it, right? But on the online model, now you have a chance to scale and reach way more students. But two, it's being done on a competency base, meaning that you don't have to go and wait 4 years to get your bachelor's degree, which, by the way, at time is such a prohibitive factor for a lot of people who need to get their education, right? If you are a young parent, right? If you have to work full time because you don't have the family resources to support you through a 4-year degree, then you will opt out. But if the model allows you to plan your educational career around other parts of your life, now you can see how more people from underrepresented backgrounds, whether you're first generation, where you're from a rural town, right, low income, person of color, female, etc. Now you can see how more of us are getting access to higher education, and at a tiny fraction of the cost of what it will be the next best thing, which is a public education type of institution, right? It's for a year, I believe it's about $6,000. So thinking about how can the online delivery of education really break down barriers. WGU has done a great example of that. We at NUVP, at NEWU Venture Partners, we're taking the same kind of mission and just applying it to even more companies out there that are doing the same thing. I think Lucas and Sherry, the stuff that you're working on this, and I think it comes down to, at the end, who owns the brand of that educational content, right? We're so used to right now having higher education institutions be the owner of that brand. Lucas, you're kind of bringing that down. It's like, well, can we get that to a point where the student is the owner of the brand? And Sherry, you're approaching it from the educator perspective. It's like, well, if I as an educator are teaching a better, say, intro to, I won't use critical thinking, like intro to philosophy, if my intro to philosophy class is better, say, than the other professor, and thus I'm producing better, employees or people going into the workforce better prepared, then I should also be seen as, it's not just the institution as a whole that prepare that, but my efforts as an educator, right? And then with Lucas' perspective, it's I as a student need to go out and say, hey, look, these are actually the skills that I've acquired, regardless of what institution I'm getting them, they speak for themselves. A new employer can look at this to hire me for my entry position, but also even when I'm at an employer, hey, I did 2 analyst years and I've acquired these skills. You know, how do we badge that in a way that we can trace the origin of those skills and who authenticated them and who's the actual owner? Where do they live? Do they live on the server of a company or a nonprofit? But what if that nonprofit disappears? Does my badge disappear? Now the student or the employee, the learner, is able to is the owner of those badges, and presumably what happens is now you're able to reduce the friction costs associated with one going from learner to employee, but also as an employee being upskilled and then moving on to a better opportunity.
So I'm just curious, and maybe we can talk about some more specific blockchain applications or other emerging technologies on the ed tech space. I think, Ed's working on internships, so I want to hear more about that. But are there any projects in your portfolio right now that are using blockchain? How are they using it? Or are there any other emerging techs that you guys are looking at, like AI, or I don't even know what the applications would be, but I'm just kind of curious if there's any other trends you're seeing besides blockchain.
So in a couple of companies that we're, I'm trying to figure out if I should give names or not, but a couple of companies that we are kind of assessing and having very conversations on potentially being investors in. And I think Taylor will be familiar with them since they're part of the Open Source Skills Alliance and helping build that, which is OSSA, the Open Source Skills Alliance, essentially trying to take skills and properly, categorize them and tag them. So then when you have communication within, for nursing, that word is very different than communication within marketing, right? So then you're able to tag all of this to make all this unbundling of the brand and figure out where it's going to skills and where they reside better. But for example, I guess one other company is doing badges and being built on a blockchain underlying tech in order to make sure that badge lives, with that user, and that you don't need to rely on, institutions to try to verify time and time again. So then we're definitely seeing some pretty cool stuff in the blockchain space. Another one is building data trust in order for multiple players to come into, have a common goal and turn on the faucet of data, have it go into data trust. They can track all of the data, and then for them to be able to then have this collective pool of data that they can analyze for their own specific outcomes and goals and metrics.
Super interesting and exciting, all the different projects that are coming out. So I know Ed had mentioned using blockchain to make internships better. I think that's something that would interest our students. Maybe you can tell us more about that.
Sure. I mean, that's a sort of long plan, if you like, the medium plan. I don't want to say we're doing it yet. And I'm working with Lucas. I mean, Lucas has been the inspiration to say, you know, there are these problem spaces out there. My obsession is, how do you curate experience, right? And we with the company I work with, the Cooplexity Institute, we design games and simulations for a decision-making and uncertainty for senior executives, right? And so in face-to-face situations, they can monitor their reactions to the object in front of them, the simulation, and they produce experiences which they can capture for themselves and take and transfer into their workplace. The challenge I see in education and higher education in particular, and there could be a difference across the pond, across the Atlantic, between the way we're seeing these things, but we face very similar institutional sort of inertia as you've been expressing so far. Is how do you help young folk take into the world not evidence of the assessment, which is what we call a node or the end of the game, but how do you take evidence of what they've been playing throughout the class, so their experience, these micro activities that make the difference, not to just employers, so not for economic utilitarian purposes, but for society, right? So that's one sort of issue we're facing. How do we capture, and the internship looks like a decent space to examine that, insofar as interns struggle. They start with, well, I'm a student, I have no experience. It's almost apologetic. And yet I would argue, and I think a lot of my colleagues would argue, that they've had phenomenal experience in the classroom or in their projects that just isn't captured by our formal methods, our formal observations. And so it's that the internship project is very much there to. We would hope to connect with Lucas's group, and we've spoken about this a few times. I'll let Lucas talk about the excitement he has in terms of the application of blockchain benefits in terms of the technological benefits maybe from that. But for me, the way we view it is, how do you curate experience? And why would you curate experience individually? Yes, one thing is to own your life's experience. But there are a number of reasons, and I think Joel sort of alluded to a few of them. A lot of the assumptions we make are this kind of life cycle view of how we go through life and where the sort of barriers are going to be, or where the big breakthroughs are going to be, or where I get promoted, whatever that is. But that's changing, or maybe it's always been different, but we've been blinkered in a sort of paradigmatic view of how life goes through its learning experiences. And the thinking for me is, if I can curate, then I am better able to recognize, and I don't know, Ashlie, you said at the opening, you'd really like to know how people, rather than simply take learning or use learning, is how they build life with learning, how they enact, right? So I think that's the really powerful thing about blockchain. It gives the individual ownership, the possibility of curation, and then the possibility to then build their lives. For example, there's this thing called synoptic learning. I'm bumping through life, I have my sort of curated experiences, and then something pops up that I can connect to, right? That could be work, it could be a social encounter, it could be a love encounter. But how do I, and that could be chance. So it's not this linear progress. And I think that's the opportunity we're working with, and we imagine is experience, yes, a data set, but it enables you to build and transform rather than merely transition, right? So not only the questions, I think, yes, we give you a little wallet as an intern and you take it and you go to an employer. But I think even more exciting than that is, I have a brother or sister who I can combine these experiences with and do something who knows what. And it's in that unknown space that I'm excited about blockchain. I think it will release a lot of these possibilities and move us away, including some of the universities. I mean, to be fair, the model that I would offer, Ashlie, and maybe you all know that because you're on that side of the Atlantic, is MIT's Otto Scharmer, where he's got this thing called the U Lab set up. And the ULab is very much about saying, we've got, you know, the library is outside, it is this planet. And how do we take, I can't remember the name of it, it's a pretty famous library anyway. How do we take that building, change its purpose, but the notion of the library is beyond us now. But yes, I think the majority of the institution, the university, are probably protected, have been protected so far, if I'm looking on this side of the planet, by local monopolies in time and space, right? And what Joel was alluding to is that when you start to look at the online space or the possibilities of blockchain, then time and space breaks down into micro moments. And it is up then to the individual to monopolize that, the learner to monopolize that. And I think that's the change. I couldn't possibly guess on a time frame. I think probably, like Taylor said, it's going to come with accidental cracks here, there, and transformation takes place like that. Coming from my sort of complex systems thinking head on now, there is this concept called autopietism, which is to explain natural systems and how they evolve. But one of the very important things is when they break down. And I think we're observing now that sort of metaphorical break because of COVID-19 and sort of forced positions. And I expect we will see quite a bit of transformation. And this group over here, I'm hoping, will be able to sort of keep reflecting on that as we transition, as we transform, actually.
Yeah, you brought up something that is a point I want to maybe dive into a little more, is how we need to reimagine what counts as a learning experience, because you have things like internships, and you have a class, and you have maybe a game you played, Sherry, all these different, and especially when you get into the online space, we have all of these new, we can create a new ontology of what counts as something that you can earn a badge for, something that can count as experience that an employer might be interested in, or a creative collaborator, or an investor. So yeah, super interesting on the internship side, and figuring out what is an experience, what is an educational experience, what is something that you can mark in your resume as something that might be interesting. Any other thoughts about new forms of educational experiences? Yeah,
the reason, Lucas and I started talking about this, because it is a particularly painful part of a young person's sort of moment in learning and in connecting and sort of going beyond the walls. We talk about tearing down walls just to allow the world in. And it's, it just seemed that was the interface. And we thought, well, why wait till the interview? Why don't we look at how we can help? Yeah. I don't know if Lucas wants to come in, because he certainly is sort of triggered off a lot of the work we were doing.
Yeah, sure. Just to add on that a bit, and following up also on what Taylor was speaking about before, for us and in the conversations Ed and I have been having, a very interesting thing is, can we actually pay people to learn? Can we bring the model upside down and make that difference? Because we believe that is one of blockchain's, maybe not short-term, but mid-long-term best applications potentially, right? Joel was speaking about the massive debt we have now and the cost of education, and how that is a very big problem. And if we can turn that all the way and really be able to, with things like tokenization, right, to be able to capture those skills, those competences that we've been talking about, and assign a monetary value to them somehow, then I think that's really gonna be awesome. And I think that for our generation that is facing all these problems with money and with not knowing where to go, not knowing how to find their first job, if we can have that experience of, in an online environment, being able to learn things and being able to monetize those things, we can have, for example, experiences where not only we're not paying to learn, but we can learn anything for free and then be rewarded for that. And I think for all the students, for example, in the MouseBelt University program that are listening to us, I'm sure that's something very appealing for sure. So I would like to know also about, well, all your guys' views, and especially Taylor, because he mentioned this thing, and I know you guys are working with this, but we are, and I am very interested in that, in how can we change the model and pay people to learn, because I'm sure that if we were to go into any class right now and propose something like that, all students would be just like, wow, I would really like to be able to learn for free, and if you pay me for that, and if I can get a reward, and if, as Ed mentioned, I can create an experience that I can take with myself for the rest of my life, that's really a game changer. So really interested in seeing how we can do that, and how blockchain, for the first time in history, allows for that.
And if I can, just a personal story to connect the dots, because, and sorry, Joel, this will be short. But, you know, first of all, there are, you know, groups like BitDegree and others that have already, on a really small scale, proven that, you know, at least conceptually, like, these things can happen. One thing that actually pulled me into the space a couple years ago, I was an avid writer and always just loved sort of keeping a personal journal and you know, often, you know, publishing that in a more public forum. And I came across a platform called Steemit, which a lot of folks may know, early sort of social / blogging, blockchain based blogging and content curation platform. And I finally saw, that was one of the few moments where I saw the full loop connect, where I was starting to publish things and folks were recognizing it. I was earning a little bit of cryptocurrency. I then, you know, probably for my own learning, I was like, well, what does this look like to like actually turn this around into the world that I know, which is, you know, sort of fiat US dollars. Got into exchanges, understood how that worked. And, you know, it's a really long process right now. Like, we've got work to do, but I finally saw this loop where I was creating content, putting it into the world. Folks were recognizing it, paying me. Again, we're talking, you know, maybe $5 or $10. I was going and like buying a coffee based on a blog post that I just happened to drop into this interesting new platform. So just wanted to share that. I mean, this was a really interesting full circle moment. And that's really what catalyzed me to be like, I got to go into this full steam ahead, because there is something interesting happening here.
And just to add kind of a little bit to the conversation that Lucas and Taylor have talked about, where the end goal is to get paid to learn, right? I think the first stepping stone, or the first step that I've seen that's going in that direction, are ISAs, the income share agreements, where first a student will go and take on debt to then be able to pay for the education. Now you have companies, right, like MentorWorks, Stride Funding, that are coming in and say, actually, look, hey, this education you're getting is valuable. You're going to be able to make a certain amount of income. We want to give you a value on that. And then if you actually are making that income, great, you give us a certain percent for 5 years and then we're done. But if you don't make that income, don't pay us back. You know, clearly whoever educated you failed and we weren't able to see that properly. So you shouldn't be responsible for paying back debt. Now, that's like the first stepping stone, right? It's kind of, now that we're able to track sort of potential income or value from certain actions, then we can start unbundling even more and more to get to the state of the world that I think Lucas and Taylor, you've been describing. So pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see, you know, I hear pitches all day too, we're a VC as well. So have definitely seen some projects in the blockchain space working on, you know, income ISAs. Sorry, I don't know the term. But yeah, perfect use case for blockchain. So we're running out of time a bit. I want to make sure that anyone listening can find your guys' projects, can get in touch with you if they need to. So Sherry, where can people find you, and who do you want to contact you?
So I'm sure you'll share the link out. I do have, well, I'll give you the link out so you can share with folks, okay? But because I am working on a side project, as I'm in the trenches. I'm in ivory tower and I'm still toughing it out because I have some faith that things can turn around. But I have my little small company, and certainly I'm also looking for people who might want to contribute to what we are trying to do, because we are trying to document ideas and trade that. That knowledge can be traded, that knowledge can be exchanged, and also it can grow to something else. So I'm interested in people who might be willing to help us build our project. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. You like technical on the technical side too?
Yeah, technical side, ideal contribution is fine. But basically I am the primary designer. I've been designing games. So that would be the type of conversations that I would like to have.
Awesome. So anybody interested in that, please find Sherry Jones. You can find her on www.blockchainphilosophers.com. That's the website I made up. How about you, Taylor? Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm all over the sort of social spaces at Take and Design, but certainly can reach directly out, learningeconomy.io, and I'm just Taylor at learningeconomy.io. And yeah, all big thinkers, dreamers, doers, welcome. We'd love to, you know, we're amassing a small army that wants to change the future. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Love to chat.
Absolutely. Lucas, where can people find you if they want to get involved with EagleCheck and know more about blockchain and background checks?
Sure, yeah. So we have a website called home.eaglecheck.io, but also I'm sure Ashley will be able to share the link of my LinkedIn, for example. My email address is also hilcanton.lucas@gmail.com. And very happy to talk with any student from the university program or just with anyone that wants to talk. And related to what we were talking about with Ed, any startups or students that are also looking for internships or interns and want to explore this possibility to use blockchain to make them better, also happy to chat with any of them.
Do you guys need interns on EagleCheck?
Not at the moment, but we have some startups that actually need interns around, so we can always.
Yeah. For any students listening, Lucas is a great person, or anyone on his team, to talk to about their experience starting a startup as students and getting in touch with a VC and going through an accelerator. So for any students who are curious about his experience there, that's a good person to reach out to. He introduced us to Ed. Ed, thank you so much for joining. If people want to find you and what you're working on, how can they find you?
Sure. I think the easiest, I've shared my LinkedIn profile with you, Ashley, so you know, whatever publicity you need to give that, go ahead and do it. The easiest thing is the Cooplexity.com, so that's C-O-O, not C-O-M, C-O-O-P-L-E-X-I-T-Y.com. The email address is edward.gonsalves@cooplexity.com, and anytime anyone, in terms of the project, Luce and I are probably in about a month going to be looking for folks. We really practice walking the talk, you know, and so we've got interns who we're trying to help with experiences to curate them with them. EagleCheck might be one of those, we're not sure yet. So we're open to, you know, internships, yes. I'll let Lucas prioritize those, whether we need the tech side or we need the sort of more conceptual side. Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And Joel, any particular projects you want to hear from? How can they find you?
Yeah, so our website is NEWUventures.com. My LinkedIn, Joel Camacho. My email, it's joel@newuvp.com. Projects, anything, you know, that is improving access and affordability in the higher ed space, post-secondary readiness, improving the learning experience for higher ed students, and every entry into the workforce and upskilling. If there's a blockchain component into your tech stack, even better. So yeah, reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all of our panelists. This is Ashlie Meredith again with MouseBelt Blockchain Accelerator, head of education over there, getting to organize my dream panel, really thinking about how blockchain technology can help instructors, teachers, students, employees, employers, and really build the future and reimagine the future of education and work, especially in a time like now. It's really great to stop and kind of rethink And as everything moves virtual, just how we can be in step with those digital revolutions and really enhance student outcomes, which all of us on this call care about. I think the number one thing I ask myself with this entire university program we've built through MouseBelt is, how can I bring more value to students? And I think this conversation will definitely bring value to them, especially people who care about these things and maybe want to start their own companies or join projects or just learn more about how blockchain can shape the future of education. So thank you guys all again so much. And now back to our regular programming at Reimagine 2020.
Stay tuned to learn more about the state of blockchain education at major universities all around the world. Reimagine 2020.